It's a great pleasure to be here. And let me begin by asking Carolina Rossini Carolina said that she found that not everybody in the audience was necessarily from a technological background. And she thought it would be useful if we kicked off by talking about what exactly we mean by digital public infrastructures. So, Carolina, over to you.
Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here with my great colleagues and to have met so many of you during these days. Thank you for being here on a Sunday morning instead of at the beach. So I really appreciate your energy for being here. And I'm actually originally from Brazil, being based in Boston, but I never left Brazil. And through the years, I worked on things from open educational resources to open source to digital inclusion, so far and so on. So actually, digital public infrastructure is not a new narrative, even if it's a new name. Countries around the world are taking to digital solutions at an unprecedented pace, and I think we saw that in many panels, and that rate has sped up after COVID. While this digitalization process seems to be inevitable, countries still have the choice of deciding not only how to digitize, but most importantly, for whom. And I think the Brazilians yesterday, assuming the T20 coordination, have expressed that for whom very clearly. Within this context, we see the expansion of this narrative of DPIs, digital public infrastructures, which are personally considered a well-done digital transformation, or we could say a digital transformation with a purpose. DPIs, when implemented based on a system approach and is well done, breaks silos, thrives for interoperability, transparency, and an inclusive triad of transversal digital systems. And what are these triad? It's digital identity, payment systems, and data governance. And I purposefully use the word data governance and not data management because it became much more than the traditional data management regarding where you put the data, where the data is. But it's about thinking also about rights, so forth and so on. And when I say data governance, as I was mentioning, I'm not only referring to issues of where the data is, where the data is transiting to and from, where the data is deposited. I'm also referring to issues of privacy, data protection, and also how we actually enable data sharing when we need, right? We need to enable data sharing, and the panel yesterday on data flows talked about that, based on issues of public interest, from climate to health, to all these issues dealing with global challenges that are common challenges. At the DataSphere Initiative, the think tank I co-founded, we say that we need responsible frameworks on data governance. So the value of that data is, generates equity to all. So good DPIs then are provided by platforms that are led by an accountable variety of multi-stakeholder partnerships, right? They can be private-public partnerships, they can be through procurement, they can take various forms through contract arrangements or partnership arrangements. They must be human-centric and focus on inclusion and ethics, something that for the new head of the G20, Brazil, the country of my origin, is very focusing on. And without digital inclusion, we don't have DPIs. But it's very interesting. I worked in a lot of indexes around digital transformation and digital inclusion, from the Internet Inclusion Index to the Network Readiness English to the index to the Global Innovation Index. And in all of those indexes, we understand that if there is not a purpose, if there is not a use for that internet, a lot of people don't even want, they don't see the need for connectivity. So if you want to connect somebody from the agricultural sector, or if you want to provide financial inclusion, that technology must serve the user. So the DPI also must serve the user. especially populations at risk, such as refugees, which is an issue that lots of our countries are dealing with.
Carolina, we'll have to keep the responses a little briefer,
Thank
please.
you, yes.
Yeah.
One final is actually an example from Brazil. So besides the India stack that Anit is gonna mention, Brazil is actually not behind the DPIs, and we have a very extreme example called
Mike.
PIX. Called PIX, right? And PIX is a payment system based on a digital ID system, and since its launch in 2020, more than 140 individuals, about 80% of the adult population that's connected, remember not everybody in Brazil is connected, are using PIX. So we must lay down this plumbing for an inclusive digital society. Thank you.
Could I turn to you, Robert, to shed some light on the first question, which is, should efforts to scale up DPIs, which is what we're calling digital public infrastructures, and accelerate data flows globally, take place in parallel or reinforce each other?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's an excellent question. I just want to build off what Carolina was talking about, and just building off, I think, what we all know as the India stack. And the India stack used sort of three elements of digital public goods to conceptualize what we now know as DPIs, which of course you mentioned is not a new term. They did theirs at three levels. They started off with the digital identity, Aadhaar, and they've made that available through an open source solution called MOSIP, which they're trying to roll out across different markets in the world. The second layer, of course, was the payment system. UPI, and PIX is another example. In Africa, the best example is what is being done in Ghana. They've probably got the most advanced interoperable payment system. And then the layer that goes on top of that is data exchange. So to your question around should we do this in parallel, or do we need to do it in sort of a single approach? My view, and I'll be very sort of focused on the continent of Africa, is today we know that despite all the changes, all the modernization around mobile technology, around financial inclusion, we still have 450 million Africans who are financially excluded. And we've done some work, and we realize that if we look at the trajectory in terms of moving people who are financially excluded into the financial inclusion bracket, and we look at a 10-year regression, the number is reducing by minus 4.5%. So if we continue on that trajectory up to 2030, we'd only have brought on board 100 million. So it means by 2030, we'll still have 350 million Africans. And we project it further to 2050, that number only drops to 250 million. So that's a big problem. So my view is that we still have to focus on a country level where we roll out cost-effective solutions which using digital public goods, and we have great examples of doing this. Rwanda today is building their own system using open source solutions, and that brings down the cost. And that's quite critical, because what you're finding with a lot of these technology products is you have to bring in engineers from outside the continent, and you're not actually doing significant training or transfer of knowledge. So we're working with Rwandan engineers. One of the greatest moments for my career actually was last year when we span up a DP, digital public good, which is a payment solution using an open source solution, and we had 60 engineers, graduate engineers from the ages of 20 to 25. All of them were Rwandans. And I think that's the power of what digital public goods and digital public infrastructure can do. It'll bring back control. It'll allow us to upscale our technical resources so they can chart a roadmap that then affects the 450 million Africans. So I believe we need to focus on a country level first, and then once you figured out the country level, then the issue of data exchange for cross-border can take place at a phase 2. So I think the first thing is sort out in-country issues, and then once you finish that, then pivot to cross-border.
Fine. Anyone else like to chime in on this particular question of should it be happening parallelly or should it be happening reinforcing each other? And please keep your answers brief because we have a number of questions to get through.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I already spoke a lot, but one of the things that I think is core here is the idea of trust, right? There are a lot of geopolitics here involved on countries cooperating on international solutions, but we must cooperate to deal with some challenges that are global. But we need to ensure that both purpose and trust exist if we want to reinforce each other initiatives for the good of society globally. So I'm just going to pause there.
Thank you. The second thing is, which I think we've already touched on, that can G20 countries enhance cross-border data flows in areas such as payments, agriculture, and health by drawing on and broadening the geographical scope of DPIs? Who'd like to take this one?
Well, I can take a crack at it, but I can't say that I'll do a good job. But let me just say that not every day in your life you get to speak in front of two presidents who have been my idols and have given us hope for the world. So I salute you, Your Excellencies. Thank you very much. So I think just taking off from what the discussion has been until now, so as somebody who has been associated with what we now call DPI, but when we started with Aadhaar about 14 years ago, we had no idea what we were doing. I'm an economist in the middle of a group of technical people talking about biometrics and IDs. But what was important, and I'll come to the G20 issue, but what was important is that when you went to any public district court in India, in the rural areas, you will find a line of people in front of the notary trying to prove their identity, trying to prove who they claimed to be, not who they were. And there were 25 ways of proving who you were in front of a court and a notary, and that cost a poor person about 10 days of wages. And just the fact that you could have one number linked to your biometrics and that could prove who you claim to be, I think reduced the costs of just proving who you were for especially a poor person. I come from a middle-class family, so it was not a difficult thing for me, but that is what I think Aadhaar at the base level and any ID system which helps people prove who they claim to be in a cost-efficient manner is what digital public infrastructure is. It changes the lives of people on the ground. And coming to all the other discussions about global standards and things like that, when any one of us, when we come into a country, we switch on our cell phones after the flight, and we expect to be connected to a GSM network. And when we enter this place, we just put on our Wi-Fi, and we expect to be connected on WhatsApp. I think nobody in this room has not sent a WhatsApp message. So at one level, if you think of it, we are all connected in a World Wide Web of data. And that is something that we should take into account. Now, how do organizations like the G20, which spans a very diverse set of countries, make sure that this is not only in cellular networks, but also in financial transactions, in terms of proving one's identity, in terms of having an exchange of data in different sectors, for example, health and education. And we'll hear from Jainaba, I think, later on. But I think that is where standards and open standards are extremely important, and that's the basis of digital public infrastructure at the core. Final point, I think we have kind of forgotten how the internet was formed. It was based on protocols. So HTTP is a protocol. SMTP, where we all send emails, is a protocol. TCP/IP, where transfer of data takes place, is a protocol. And what happened over time was through different things, like especially within G20, some countries had the big platforms, we moved away from protocols to platforms. And it's time to get back to the protocol to make sure that the data exchange among G20 countries, among OECD, takes place in a seamless manner.
Thank you.
If I can mention quickly, I love that you brought the tech side, the geek side, right? And one of the important things here is that we need to bring more geeks to the table, right? I'm a lawyer, I work in technology for 25 years, but I still don't know how to develop software, right? So we need to bring the IEEE, we need to bring CODATA, we need to bring those organizations alike to then talk to the users, to then talk to the policymakers, so when DPIs, when those services are developed through a platform model or not, the design is user-friendly, the design is inclusive, the design takes into consideration diversity and accessibility issues. Otherwise, those DPIs will have a large barrier in terms of adoption.
Something very quick on that. I think from a G20, G21 perspective, there needs to be a change in mindset around, I'll talk at an infrastructure level. Because today to talk about driving the infrastructure required for DPIs, if you're looking at 54 countries in Africa, you need what I call tier 4 data centers. One costs about $5 million. And you need to have 2 of them per country. So that's what? That's 10 million times 54. You're talking about a ticket size of $540 million just for the infrastructure, because you need to have data centers. So is that the direction we need to go, or do we at a G21 level need to sort of ask Africa to look at a hub and spoke, where we begin to say, listen, let's keep data in Africa for sure, but we don't need to have 54 times 100, times 2 of those. Maybe we need about 10 high-level data centers. And then from a governance perspective, policy regime needs to look at saying, can we ask countries to host data in a cloud on the continent and look at things like data embassies or elements of policy that allow for countries to access data from other countries? Because if we think that we can spend 540 million and then the time it takes to set these things up, we could lose about 5 or 8 years just putting in the infrastructure. So I think at a G21, this is a critical piece that is required, because without that infrastructure, we'll sort of just be having conversations, we'll not be executing.
I think that's an excellent point, because I love the hub and spoke idea to reduce the amount of infrastructure that has to be built to reduce the time. And I think, that would really make a difference. I'm going to come to you now, Janoba, to ask you to tell us what has been your experience in trying to introduce digital public infrastructure in the Gambia.
Thank you so much for having me in the panel today. I am a young graduate student from the Management Development Institute, and I am here to share my story, a use case where we are using digital public infrastructure to transform my life and other young people, playing an active role in the digital transformation efforts globally, and especially the global south, which is, Gambia in particular. So the thing why I am interested in digital public infrastructure, I started my journey 2 years ago when I was thinking of doing physiotherapies, which is far away from technology. But there was a story I shared in Kigali Global Dialogue, and I think I'm going to share it today here again, which inspired me to be in DPI, to help to learn and inspire young people like me to be in DPI. So the story was about a woman who was in labor, who was giving about to give birth, and I am I forgot that I forgot to say that I am part of the Red Cross. I am volunteering. I've been volunteering in the Red Cross for over years. So in my neighborhood, the woman was in labor and she was about to give birth, and we don't have easy mobility access in the Gambia. Some people, I've talked to some people here, and I was talking about Open Gambia network, which I will talk about, and they were telling me where is Gambia located in the world, and I showed them in the map that Gambia is, with in Senegal, not we're surrounded by Senegal. So this woman was in labor, and at 3 a.m. at night, and we couldn't find access. We couldn't access a mobility for us to take her to the hospital. So it was very difficult for us to take her to the hospital, and unfortunately, she gave birth outside the house, so which was very unhealthy, and it was risks for her and the baby. So at that time, like I was doing my uh, I was just starting my course in information systems, and like I was like, I'm doing computer science, and we can use technology to solve these challenges we are facing, since the government, like, we don't have people that are supporting youths and women especially to to solve these challenges we are facing. So we have, like, they introduced me to Foundation for Digital Economy, where a need is, and it was they teach us on digital public infrastructure. They let us know what is digital public infrastructure and how we can use it to transform into the digital world. So I started learning about it like early this year, and here we are launching Open Gambia Network in on Saturday next week, 2nd December, and it's a success because we were imagining how we can use DPIs to solve these issues that Gambia is facing, you know, at large global south. But here we are launching the foundation, which is concentrating on transforming health sectors, mobility sector in the Gambia, hospitality, education, how we can make life easy for Gambian citizens at large. So we are starting with retail sector, where we can bring all these retail sectors, players, in not only in the city, but local retail players. We can bring them in this platform, where is open network platform, where all these people can be. Like, for example, we can have like someone like the one we are launching. We have a company that sells groceries, and we have a company that does deliveries, and we have a company that does digital payments. So we were thinking about how we, bring all those retail players in one umbrella, so that they can communicate and speak the same language without you without you going to different applications, buying things, it costs a lot, like resources, internet, and money. So we're building this open platform. We being compliant to like make life easy for the citizens in the Gambia. So this project will be launched 2nd December, and our focus is to make life easy for the Gambian citizens by using the DPI, digital public infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think what you've done, Jainaba, is to really remind us what levels of technological expertise are there in the world, because you pointed out to us that the very basic levels are lacking in certain countries, right? And we who have perhaps more advanced technologies, even in the global south, cannot ignore the needs of countries that need to build from scratch. So I think that's a very valuable lesson that all of us should keep in mind. And simply because our own countries have got advanced technologies available to us, we should not forget the needs of those who need these basic technologies to survive, and so on. So I'm sorry, we actually are running short of time, and we need to also move on to a question. So I'll end with my last question, which is, what kinds of trust and confidence building measures can nations engage in to consider a rapprochement between DPI and the cross-border data flows? We've covered it to some extent, but if any of you would like to comment on this in more detail, please feel free.
Sure, I can kickstart then. One thing I also want to build from Jais, if you allow me, she said her nickname was Jais back there, is actually, I've done a lot of travel in Brazil and Africa. And actually, the amount of innovation that's coming from our countries. So I don't want to even say that we are behind, because especially at SMEs and startups, it's incredible. But to allow for that innovation, then I can talk about the DPI requirements, right? Those DPI requirements are clear governance, increased trust. Robert mentioned open source. If the government's going to build a platform, DPI, that platform needs to be open so local communities can build upon that platform to deal with local needs. We need to have strong interoperability and portability rules, so you also have competitivity for the private sector, building from the public infrastructure. You have to have openness, right? But that does not trump privacy and data security. You have to allow, as I mentioned, easy DPI connections through APIs, right? You will have to have
Mike,
this user-centric design. And finally, you have to have systems of assessment and accountability to make sure that we are using DPIs for good and not for surveillance of citizens.
With that, we're nearly at the 10-minute mark. So before we discuss any further, I just wanted to check if there are any specific questions or queries. Yes, please.
I'm supposed to say that my panel is my favorite panel, but I have to say that this is my favorite panel. This is digital public infrastructure is why we came here, and we look to India for precedent, especially on the Digital Locker Authority. The question is, we have a challenge in the Philippines wherein our data is owned by banks. We couldn't even go get our own data and not pay 150 pesos, which is $3 per page. I want to know, what is it that we can do from the private sector to trigger, I don't know, do we license India's Digital Locker Authority? What can we do on the private sector to trigger more developments in digital public infrastructure? Thank you.
Who would like to take this one?
Can I take
Yes,
that one?
please.
Thank you. So I totally agree. So the problem with us, and we have been grappling with this in many countries, including in India, is that the public data has become, private data is in private hands, and it's not in a public record, and therefore to access that you need to pay. Now, in the DigiLocker case, as part of the whole, whatever we call it, the stack in India, and I'm sure there are in several other countries, we have something called a DigiLocker. And so the DigiLocker keeps a digital mirror of a physical document. So for example, you can ask for your certificate, an education certificate, to be sent to your DigiLocker. And how it is then transferred is through a data exchange layer where you give permission either one time, or you can give, it's like any other website that you give a permission to use cookies, right? So you can give a one-time permission, or you can give a permanent permission to your bank, a permanent one, or multiple ones, or to a credit agency. And then the person owns that locker and the data, right? And therefore you change the power dynamics between the private sector, private player who's housing your data, and your data remaining in a public infrastructure. And that's the difference that we are trying to make. It's hard. It's really hard because our data has been shared so many times that it's difficult to pull it back. But once we start, you can start the process of now anything new which is coming, like your certificate of education, can be put to the DigiLocker.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, from a private sector perspective, it's very difficult, but really it's just around regulation, regulation, regulation. We've really got to push the regulators to push for open finance so that the data then goes back and is owned by you, the consumer. And then you move to what I call a digital supermarket. But without the regulator coming on board, that will be a problem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's about regulation for portability. We need that so people really get the benefits of their own data.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for the session. I'm Niharika from the Asia Group. Firstly, Carolina, I absolutely agree on the bit about digital trust, especially for countries like India, where we're putting data principles at the center of data flows. My question is broadly about the private sector, what your views are on expanding the role of private sector in the DPI ecosystem across layers, so infrastructure, tech, application layer. And within this broad theme, is commercial viability for private sector a priority as we think about sustaining DPI in the long run? Are we thinking of incentives in the open source ecosystem? Are we thinking of incentives being built into design of DPI? So just a broader private sector involvement question.
So I want to bring an example in the US where I'm based. And I'm based in Boston, so please come visit me. I teach at Boston University there. And one of the things that the government's bringing to Boston is a new gigantic, many new projects from ARPA-E. And one of what they want to do is actually to push forward the idea of a public cloud, which is going to be incredible, right? If our countries were able to have the billions the US has to do that, but that is a project for 10, 20 years. DPIs cost a lot of money and need to be done right since the beginning, otherwise they won't work, right? But then you have to work with the private sector to say, it's like the roads, right? I enable the core infrastructure, I enable the core plumbing, and now you can have at the second layer, right? If you think about it, the internet has stacks, you can think about DPIs has stacks too. In the second, third layer, you have private sector investment through APIs to build from that, right? So MasterCard was actually pretty mad at the Indian government because of the DPI payments. But MasterCard can still build up from that and compete at the consumer service level, right? So it's like the Human Genome Project. You set the ground, you set that core knowledge, and then you build from that.
Just quickly add to that. So we advocate for an open governance model. And the open governance model is like a PPP. So you involve public sector, private sector, and then also ignite the fintech community. So that at a governance level, you have people sitting at that level. And if we don't do that, then you're going to have a challenge because then you don't have everybody at the table as you're building out these systems. So we are actually trying to drive regulators to look at open governance, which is inclusive. Because if you don't have it at that level, then it doesn't percolate down to the technology piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to add something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got more questions, so can we keep it brief, please?
So to your question, like in the Gambia, what we're doing, we're advocating for the government to include youths in digital public transformations in the Gambia. Because before we were having a Ministry of Information and Communication, which we're not seeing ourselves as youths into technology. But now we have a separate ministry that is Ministry of Digital Economy, Communication and Digital Economy, which, you know, they're including youths in participating in transforming like the education aspect, like e-learning platforms we can have for the Gambia. Like Open Gambia Network is focusing on building platforms for youths in the Gambia who don't have access to proper education, like the rural areas in Gambia, where like they will have to travel from their houses some kilometers to the school. Like they will need to cross rivers to come to the city and learn to have a proper education. With this, it can bring innovation, transform, and they will sit in their cities, in their towns, in their villages, and have access to courses, have access to jobs, have access to so many things that can change their lives. We don't need okay, some international organizations can World Bank is doing in the Gambia right now is digital ID, where citizens in the Gambia can use that digital ID to go to the hospital, so that the hospital will know the records of what you were diagnosed with, the diseases that you were having before. These are innovations that are happening right now in the Gambia, but with the support of international borders. If we have that support, because we're having a support from India, the Bacon community, they're supporting us by giving us the idea of open protocols that we're using to build these open systems that Gambian can use. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Yes, my name is Jules Samoti, and I'm from International Red Cross. I'm thanking you for this excellent session. I'm just coming with a question on addressing the point of disruption, because whenever we speak about DPI, we work in the conflict zones until the point of disruptions happens when the cyber operations, cyber war takes place in the conflict zone, disrupting all the delivery of basic services, which became an acute crisis to be addressed. It's just my call to say, whenever we talk about DPI, we must also think on data protection, security, and systems to preserve the delivery of services, and also all the regulations around, as we work on international humanitarian law to see how we can support the state to really be on the right side, because when disruptions happens, it raises a lot of problems today we see around the world. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shyam, and I work for Novel Insights, Washington, D.C.-based data analytics and international consulting firm. And my question is related to technological sovereignty. In the context of the Global South, how important is technological sovereignty in the development of DPI? I'm especially interested to hear about what can be done to ensure that these regions are not overly dependent on external tech providers. For example, are there any lessons that we can learn from India on how they balanced technological sovereignty versus the need to import technology from the rest of the world? Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like to take that, Anna?
I want to address the Red Cross question, and I'm happy to discuss this over coffee, because that's a longer conversation. We need resilience when we deploy technology, especially in the context of risk populations and risk zones. We need to count on satellites for that, and we need to count on mobile phones that are interoperable cross borders. This is something the UNHCR, the UN Agency for Refugees, is trying to do, to actually work with the telecommunications regulations, that when you move countries, your cell phone doesn't stop working. It's an exception to a telecommunications rule that is core to deal with issues of conflict zones. Because with a cell phone and a satellite, you have some resilience, and you can disperse at least financial support in the case of refugees. Just an example in that regard.
I'd like to give each of you, just in one sentence, what is your takeaway from this event?
So I think the tech sovereignty issue is really important, and I see the Chaudhary there who has transformed Bangladesh. So definitely we learned a lot from Bangladesh, and I think in some way the way DPIs are built, and you heard Jainaba.
One sentence.
every country can choose what building blocks to use for their own needs. And that's how I would define DPI sovereignty. Sorry, I took 2 sentences.
No, no. Go ahead. One sentence.
Ooh, okay, there is your tweet. Again, trust and purpose and user-centric design at the core of DPIs. Thank you.
My sentence will be the power of DPI. We own it. We, the young people of the global south, we can make it possible by, actively governments involving us in decision making and digital transformations. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is our catalyst to digital transformation in Africa. Yeah, and I think just quick one on the cybersecurity. I think we need to use pooled resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My takeaway is that we need to recognize the huge differences in the global south, and we need to cater to all levels of technology development. So that for me was a very big takeaway. Thank you. Thank you all.